62 enemy aircraft shot down, 330 combat missions, 120 air battles against the best pilots Germany ever put in the sky. And in all of it, across 2 years of the most brutal air war in human history, not once did the Luftwaffe manage to shoot him down. His name was Ivan Nikitovich Kozhedub, and he is, by the numbers, the greatest fighter pilot the Allies produced in the entire Second World War. Not the most famous. Most people in the West have never heard his name. The American ace Richard Bong scored 40. The top British and Commonwealth pilots all finished under 50. Even Kozhedub's own countryman, the legendary Alexander Pokryshkin, came in around 60. Kozhedub beat them all. And here is the part that still does not feel real. He did it flying a plane made mostly of wood. So how does a quiet farm boy from a Ukrainian village, a flight instructor who spent the first 2 years of the war stuck far behind the lines, become the deadliest Allied pilot of the whole conflict? How does a man fly into more than 100 dogfights and never lose? And what really happened on that day near Berlin, the day he kept out of the official record for the rest of his life? Let's get into it. It was 1920, in a small village called Obrazyivka, in what is now Ukraine. Ivan Kozhedub was born into a poor family. His father worked long hours, part factory labor, part working the land, the kind of life where nothing comes easy and nothing comes for free. There were no airplanes in this world. There was mud and work and church, and the slow rhythm of a farming village that had not changed much in 100 years. Nobody in Obrazyivka would have looked at this boy and seen a future air marshal. He was bookish, he was careful, he liked to draw. His father was strict about discipline, the kind of man who would send a boy out before dawn to guard the family garden just to teach him to sit still and stay alert through cold and boredom. Ivan hated it at the time. Years later, sitting alone in a cockpit for hours, watching an empty sky for the first flicker of an enemy, that patience would turn out to be one of the most valuable things he owned. But if you had asked anyone in that village what Ivan would become, the answer would not have been a warrior. It would have been something quiet. Then, in the 1930s, the Soviet Union went flying mad. Aviation clubs opened all across the country. Flying became the thing every ambitious young person dreamed about, the way some kids today dream about being astronauts. Posters showed pilots as the new heroes of the age, and Ivan, almost by accident, walked into a local flying club while he was studying at a technical school in the town of Shostka. The first time he went up, something changed in him. The careful, quiet boy found the one thing that lit him up. He took to it fast, faster than almost anyone around him. He had the steady hands, the cold nerves, and the patience his father had beaten into him without either of them knowing why it would matter. By the time the war reached the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941, Kozhedub was already a skilled enough pilot that the military made a decision that would frustrate him for years. They did not send him to the front. They made him an instructor. Think about that for a second. The deadliest Allied ace of the entire war spent the opening stretch of that war standing on an airfield, teaching teenagers how to take off and land, while the men he trained flew off to fight and, far too often, to die. When the German advance forced his school to pack up and move east, all the way to Shymkent in Central Asia, he went with it. Still teaching, still grounded, still hundreds of miles from a single enemy plane. He begged to be sent to combat. Over and over he put in the requests. Over and over they were denied. He was too valuable where he was. Good instructors kept new pilots alive, and the Soviet Union was burning through pilots at a horrifying rate. In those first months, the Luftwaffe had shattered the Soviet Air Force on the ground and in the air, destroying thousands of aircraft in a matter of weeks. The men running the training schools knew exactly how thin the line had become. Every steady instructor was worth more than another body thrown into the fire. For a man who would later be defined by his hunger to fight, Those years had to feel like a cage. But here is the thing nobody understood at the time. Those years were making him. Every hour spent drilling the basics into nervous students was an hour he spent mastering the machine himself. He flew constantly. He took apart every maneuver until he could teach it in his sleep, which meant he could fly it without thinking at all. While other young pilots got rushed to the front with barely enough training to survive their first week, often dead within a handful of sorties, Kozhedub was quietly becoming one of the most technically perfect aviators in the entire Soviet Air Force. He knew his aircraft the way a concert pianist knows a keyboard. He could feel a stall coming before the airframe ever shook. He just had not killed anyone yet. That finally changed in the spring of 1943. After endless pleading, Kozhedub was posted to the 240th Fighter Aviation Regiment, and in March of 1943, he finally reached the front. And he was handed the airplane that would carry him to greatness, a brand new fighter called the Lavochkin LA-5. Now, you need to understand what this airplane was, because it tells you everything about the war on the Eastern Front. The LA-5 was, to a large degree, made of wood, not because the Soviets thought wood was clever, but because they were desperate. The metal alloys you needed for a modern fighter were scarce. The factories were being bombed and torn down and rebuilt thousands of miles east under impossible pressure, and wood was something the country had plenty of. So Soviet engineers built a frontline fighter out of laminated wood and resin and sheer stubbornness, glued and pressed into a shape that could fight. And it worked. It was tough, it was fast enough, and up front it carried a big Shvetsov radial engine pushing somewhere near 1800 horsepower. A pair of 20mm cannons sat over the nose, the kind of guns that did not just pepper an enemy plane, but tore chunks out of it. In the right hands, the LA-5 could go toe-to-toe with the best Germany had, especially down low. Kozhedub's hands turned out to be exactly the right hands, but his start was almost a disaster. On one of his very first missions, everything that could go wrong did. He got separated from his flight leader because his fighter was running slower than the rest. He spotted a formation he took for friendly bombers, and they turned out to be German aircraft hitting his own airfield. As he moved in to attack, a German Messerschmitt slashed across him and hammered his LA-5 with a cannon burst. And then, as if that were not enough, his own side opened up on him, Soviet anti-aircraft gunners mistaking the damaged plane for a German one and pouring fire into him from the ground. Hit by the enemy, and hit by his own people on the same flight, he limped home in a wrecked aircraft, barely flyable. For a moment, it looked like the long-awaited career of Ivan Kozhedub might end before it began. He did not let it. He learned from it. That ugly first sortie taught him things no instructor ever could, about how fast a sky full of friends and enemies can turn into chaos, about how a moment of confusion can kill you faster than any ace. He filed it away, and on the 6th of July, 1943, during the gigantic tank and air battle around Kursk, the largest clash of armor the world had ever seen, he finally opened his account. He shot down a German Ju-87 dive bomber, one of those screaming, gull-winged machines that had terrorized Europe since the start of the war. One kill. After all those years of waiting, it would not stay at one for long. Because what happened over the next few months was, frankly, hard to believe. Kozhedub did not just become good, he became a phenomenon. In the autumn of 1943, as the Red Army fought to cross the Dnieper River in one of the bloodiest campaigns of the entire Eastern Front, Kozhedub went on a tear that put him on the map for good. In the first 12 days of October alone, flying mission after mission over the river, he shot down around 14 German aircraft. Some retellings push that to 17 in a single week. Either way, the meaning is the same. In a matter of days, a man who had recently scored his very first kill was suddenly one of the most dangerous fighter pilots in the entire theater. There is a detail from this stretch that says everything about how the Soviet people felt about their pilots. One of the LA-5 fighters Kozhedub flew had been paid for personally by an elderly collective farm beekeeper named Vasily Konev, who had donated his savings to build an aircraft and asked that it carry the name of his fallen nephew. So the deadliest fighter pilot of the war was, for a time, flying into battle in a plane bought with one old man's life savings and painted with a dead soldier's name. He did not waste it, and no one could put him on the ground. What made him so deadly was not recklessness, it was the opposite. All those years as an instructor had built a pilot who was patient, precise, and almost frighteningly calm. He did not throw his plane around the sky hoping to get lucky. He stalked. He used the sun, sliding in out of the glare where no one could see him. He used cloud. He closed the distance until he could not miss, fired in short, brutal bursts, and broke away before the enemy even understood what had happened. He treated air combat like a science. He studied his own gun camera footage. He drilled his wingmen on staying glued to him so his back was always covered. Most of his victims never saw him coming, and the ones who did saw him too late. By early 1944, the rewards started coming in. On the 4th of February 1944, Ivan Kozhedub was named a hero of the Soviet Union for the first time. It was the highest honor his country could give, a gold star worn over the heart. For most pilots, earning it once was the achievement of a lifetime. Kozhedub was just getting started. If you are enjoying this, take 1 second and subscribe. This channel goes deep on the weapons and the pilots of the Eastern Front, the stories the Western histories usually skip right past. Your subscription genuinely helps us keep digging them up. By the spring of 1944, Kozhedub's reputation had grown to the point where the Air Force wanted him somewhere special. He became deputy commander in the 176th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment, a unit with a special job. They were free hunters. Instead of flying tied to bombers or ground troops, escorting and defending and staying in formation, free hunters roamed the sky on their own terms. They picked their own patrol zones, looked for prey, chose their fights, hit hard, and vanished. It was the most elite kind of flying there was, and it was reserved for the best of the best. You had to be trusted to fly off alone with no one watching and come back with kills. And to do that job, the Guards Regiment got the newest, finest fighter the Lavochkin Design Bureau ever built, the LA-7. The LA-7 was the LA-5 pushed to its absolute limit. Still built around that wooden heritage, but cleaner, lighter, with the airflow smoothed out and the weight trimmed wherever the engineers could find it. It could do around 411 miles an hour. It could carry 3 cannons instead of 2, and, down low, in the thick air near the ground where most of the fighting on the Eastern Front actually happened, it was one of the deadliest dogfighters of the entire war. It could outturn and outclimb almost anything the Germans had at low altitude. Kozhedub would fly the LA-7 for the rest of the conflict. To this day, the man and the machine are spoken of together the way you cannot mention one without the other. On a wooden Soviet fighter, hunting alone, against an enemy that was still extremely dangerous even this late in the war, Kozhedub kept the kills piling up. On the 19th of August 1944, he was named a hero of the Soviet Union for the second time. 2 of the highest medals his nation had on one man's chest, and he was still in his early 20s. Most pilots would have given anything for one, and the Luftwaffe still could not touch him. That is the detail I keep coming back to. By this stage of the war, the German fighter arm was bled white, but it was not toothless. They still had veteran aces with hundreds of victories, men who had been fighting since 1939 and had forgotten more about air combat than most pilots ever learned. They still flew the deadly Bf-109 and the powerful Focke-Wulf. A late-war German fighter pilot was a genuinely terrifying opponent, the kind who could end your life in a 3-second burst from behind. Kozhedub flew into that again and again and again, and walked away every single time. 330 sorties, 120 air battles, never shot down. Read that again and let it actually land. Most aces, even the great ones, get hit eventually. They bail out, they crash land, they limp home in a shredded airframe trailing smoke. Even the truly elite German pilots, the ones with 200 and 300 kills, were shot down multiple times across the war and survived on pure luck as much as skill. Kozhedub simply never gave the enemy the chance. He was not lucky. He was careful in a way that almost no one else managed to be, while still being aggressive enough to score 60 victories. But the most astonishing moment of his entire career was still ahead of him, and it involved an aircraft that, on paper, his wooden fighter had absolutely no business beating. By early 1945, Germany was losing the war, but it had unleashed something that genuinely frightened every Allied pilot in the sky: the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. You have to understand the gap here. The Me-262 could fly around 540 miles an hour. Kozhedub's LA-7, flat out, did around 411. The jet was well over 100 miles an hour faster. In a straight line, it could simply run away from anything with a propeller, accelerate out of any fight it did not want, and come back to attack from a direction no piston fighter could match. It was the future of flight arriving years too early. Swept wings and screaming engines, and it was painted with German crosses. A propeller plane shooting down a jet was supposed to be nearly impossible. The jet held all the cards: speed, climb, and the freedom to choose every fight and leave whenever it pleased. The handful of jets the Germans got into the air could, in theory, have torn through Allied bomber streams untouched. On or around the 19th of February 1945, Kozhedub went out on a free hunt with his wingman, Dmitry Titarenko. They were patrolling near Frankfurt an der Oder when they spotted a strange, fast aircraft racing low along the line of the river. It was moving at a speed no propeller plane could match, and it had no propeller at all. It was an Me-262. By every rule of physics, that jet should have been untouchable. But Kozhedub did the one thing a jet pilot never expects from a piston fighter. He used geometry instead of speed. He knew he could not chase the thing, so he did not try. He read where it was going and angled to cut it off, trading the race he could not win for a single intercepting shot he might. Then his wingman, Titarenko, fired early. Too early, it seemed. A burst that had no real chance of hitting. But that burst spooked the German pilot, who hauled his jet into a turn to break away from the threat. And that turn brought him sliding right across Kozhedub's nose. For one fraction of a second, the fastest fighter in the world hung still in the sights of a plane made of wood. Kozhedub did what he had done 100 times before. He squeezed the trigger and fired one short, perfect burst. The Me-262 came apart and went down. In the cockpit, according to German records, was a non-commissioned officer named Kurt Lange of a jet-equipped Luftwaffe unit. With that single burst, Ivan Kozhedub became the first Soviet pilot ever to shoot down a jet aircraft in combat. A man flying a fighter made partly of wood had just killed the most advanced flying machine on the planet. Historians still argue about the exact date. Kozhedub said the 19th. Other accounts say the 15th or the 24th. But the kill itself is solid, and the meaning of it does not change. In a war full of incredible moments, a propeller pilot downing the world's first jet stands almost alone. And he was not finished. In April of 1945, in the final desperate days of the battle for Berlin, Kozhedub was still in the air, still hunting over the burning heart of the enemy capital. On the 16th of April, in skies thick with smoke and aircraft, he shot down what the records list as his 61st and 62nd victories. German planes, fought and beaten in the very last week of the war in Europe, when most men were just trying to survive long enough to go home. 62 confirmed kills, the number that crowned him the highest-scoring Allied ace of the entire Second World War. Now, a quick note on that number, because honesty matters. 62 is the careful, best-supported modern figure. Some older Soviet sources said over 60, or even 64. The truth is that record-keeping in the chaos of 1944 and 45 was never perfect, on any side of the war. Claims got confirmed late, or twice, or not at all. But 62 is the figure that holds up best to scrutiny, and even at the conservative count, no other Allied pilot in the world comes close to him. Which brings us, finally, to the strangest story of his career, the one he carried quietly for decades, the one that never made it onto his official list, and that we have to handle very carefully. According to Kozhedub's own memoir, written long after the war, something happened in the skies near Berlin in those last days that he was never able to claim, and never really wanted to. He told it like this. He was flying his LA-7 near a formation of American bombers, the big flying fortresses pounding what was left of Germany. He saw German fighters moving in to attack the bombers, and he did what any Allied pilot would do. He drove the Germans off, protecting the American crews high above enemy territory. And then, he said, the American escort fighters came after him. In his telling, a pair of P-51 Mustangs, the elegant long-range American fighters, mistook his Lavochkin for a German plane. From a distance, in the confusion of a sky packed with aircraft, a single-engine fighter with an unfamiliar silhouette was an easy thing to misread, and Soviet markings were the last thing an American pilot deep over Germany expected to see. The Mustangs opened fire on him. He noticed the tracers were long and bright, fired from far off, different from anything German or Soviet, and that was how he realized who was shooting at him. According to his account, he had a choice that lasted about one heartbeat: be shot down by his own allies or fight back. He fought back, and in the brief, ugly scrap that followed, he wrote that he shot down both Mustangs before either side fully understood the terrible mistake that was happening. Now, here is where we have to be very careful, because this is exactly the kind of story that gets twisted and inflated in the retelling. This rests entirely on Kozhedub's own post-war account. There is no Western archival confirmation of two matching Mustang losses to back it up. There is some grainy gun camera footage that has been waved around over the years as proof, but people who actually know aircraft have picked it apart, pointing out details that suggest it does not show what the storytellers claim it shows. And critically, those two American planes are not on Kozhedub's official victory list. They are not part of the 62. He never counted them, and neither should anyone else. So treat it for exactly what it is: an alleged incident, told by the man himself, reportedly hushed up because the last thing anyone wanted in the final hours of the war was a story about allies killing allies in the sky. Maybe it happened just as he said. Maybe memory and time reshaped it into something cleaner than the truth. We will probably never know for certain. What we do know for certain is the part that needs no asterisk. 62 German aircraft. Never shot down. The best the Luftwaffe had, thrown at him for 2 solid years, and not one of them ever brought him down. When the war in Europe ended, Kozhedub was still a young man, a guards captain barely into his 20s, with 3 separate Hero of the Soviet Union stars, the third awarded that August of 1945. Almost no one in the entire Soviet Union held 3. His chest also carried the Order of the Red Banner 7 times over, the Order of Alexander Nevsky, the Order of the Red Star, and the Order of Lenin, the highest decoration the state could give. Every one of them earned the hardest way there is, in the air, against people trying to kill him. But his story did not end in 1945. Years later, when jets fought jets over the skies of Korea, Ivan Kozhedub was there in command. He led the 324th Fighter Aviation Division, a unit of Soviet pilots flying the new swept-wing MiG fighters against American jets, in some of the first true jet-versus-jet combat in history. And there is a real bitterness in this chapter for a man like him, because he was ordered to stay on the ground. The greatest Allied ace of the Second World War was forbidden to fly combat himself. He was too valuable, too famous, too politically sensitive to risk being shot down or captured over enemy lines, where his presence would have proven the Soviet Union was fighting a war it publicly denied. So he commanded, and he planned, and he trained his pilots hard, and he watched younger men do the fighting, the same way he had once watched from an instructor's airfield a lifetime before. The cage had simply changed shape. He rose through the ranks for decades after the guns went quiet. In 1985, the farm boy from Obrazhevka was made a Marshal of Aviation, one of the highest military ranks his country could bestow. The quiet, careful boy who liked to draw had become a living legend of the air, a name taught to every Soviet pilot who came after him. He died in 1991, the same year the Soviet Union itself came apart. The country he had fought for did not outlive him by long. Think back to that village, the mud, the work, the church bells, the cold mornings guarding a garden, the boy who nobody expected anything loud from. He went from there to the cockpit of a wooden fighter, into more than 100 battles against the most dangerous airmen on Earth, and he came through every single one of them undefeated. He killed the first jet a Soviet ever brought down. He outscored every Allied pilot alive, in the West and the East, and he did it all without ever once letting the enemy put him in the dirt. The most famous aces of the war are mostly Western names or German names. But the man who actually finished on top, the highest-scoring Allied fighter pilot of the entire Second World War, was a soft-spoken Soviet farm boy who flew a plane made of wood and never, not once, got shot down. That is the part the Luftwaffe could never figure out. They threw their veterans at him, their Messerschmitts and their Focke-Wulfs, and at the very end even their jets, and none of it was enough. By the time they might have solved the puzzle of Ivan Kozhedub, the war was already over, and he was already a legend. If you want more stories like this, the ones the standard histories leave out, subscribe and stick around. There is a whole war up here that most people never get told about, and we are only getting started.